expert coming up. Chris Blackman has so graciously agreed to moderate this last panel for us, and she did an amazing job. I basically had to work not as hard on this panel as some of the other ones, so I really appreciate that. And she is joined by some powerhouses in the space for cybersecurity, so I am really looking forward to seeing you kick this one off.
Thanks, Caitlin. We're so happy to be here. It has been such a fantastic day worth of programming. Some of the conversations have just been amazing. Some of those examples that Brian just gave of these email threats, we're going to be talking about how things are evolving faster and faster every day. So that was a good kickoff for us. So I'm Chris Blackman. Rather than me try to struggle through any kind of introductions and making sure that I'm covering everything, I wanted to just kind of go around the room and let each of you introduce yourself, your organization, your solutions, just really quickly give us a little bit of a hint. Joe, you want to start?
Sure, Chris. Great to be here. Excited about our conversation. Many of you all might know my background. I joke, I lost my hair running an MSP for about 12, 13 years. And that was 2001 to 2014. And then after that, I just didn't have enough of the MSP ecosystem. So I came back to it after I sold that company with our partners, and then founded LineGuard and focused on really protecting the attack surface for the MSPs and their end customers, and really helping MSPs scale and grow profitably. Big challenge, right? And you've got everything up against you. I've been there, sweated it out. So happy to be here. Back to you, Chris.
Great, and some wonderful people over there at LineGuard too. I'm, good friends and have a lot of respect for your team over there. So Zane, I'm going to throw it to you. Tell me a little bit about Citricom and your history there.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, started Citricom several years ago. Similar to Joe, ran an MSP practice beforehand. Joe lost his hair, mine went gray. I don't know what the difference there, but I've been able to hang on to it for the time being, anyways. But Citricom are focused on infrastructure software for the MSP channel. Have been in this community for, in and around this community for nearly 20 years. Hard to believe. But we have products in the unified communication space, the call center space, and then we have products in the network security space, which is ultimately the topic of today. And we're ultimately focused on helping MSPs connect and protect their users' applications to the data. Obviously, the way that we work has changed, and the way that we need to connect and protect users has changed. So looking forward to the conversation today and seeing where we go from there.
And Charles, it is down to one. Oh, you're on mute, my friend.
Yeah, so I didn't run an MSP. I still lost my hair. So, so I'm Charles Preston, the CEO of uSecure. My background is primarily in sales, so I've worked across cybersecurity consultancy, reseller, MSP, vendor, and then in 2016 we started uSecure, and we've been working since then to help MSPs in the human risk management space. So we help secure the end user, help empower them to make better decisions, and we've been working across the world, helping businesses in each territory. And of course, this is an area of really significant importance, because employees are such a big part of every organization. So yeah, happy to be here, and looking forward to the panel.
So in some of our prep calls, when we were having these conversations, just kind of batting ideas around, I think that a theme emerged in just that it's so hard to keep up with how fast everything is changing whenever it comes to cybersecurity, and MSPs, find themselves kind of scrambling every day. So I wanted to start really broadly before we start diving down into more detailed topics. I want to talk about how MSPs can establish that layered security approach to protect networks, data, applications from all these diverse cyber threats, again, that are just evolving more and more every single day. So, Joe, you mentioned that you liked that term defense in depth. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I've been listening into some of the sessions before this, Wes Spencer and the group, previous session. There's so much in terms of terminology. Like you said, a trending term over the last several years has been zero trust, which is another related term to defense in depth, and it entails a lot of different things. We just heard about phishing, spear phishing, quishing. I mean, it's unbelievable, right? And most people will tell me when I get all excited, they say, Joe, you need to slow down. There's just so much vocabulary, and I have to remind myself to do the same. I like defense in depth because it's very down to earth. It's very understandable. It tells you, wow, there's a lot to do, and when you need to defend against attackers, threat actors that are continuing to advance, continuing to make money in significant ways, that we have to figure out how to create layers of defense and assume the breach and assume that initial access is already happening. And when we think of it in that way, we start to, develop ideas and concepts such as zero trust, which is, assume that the first layer has been breached. Well, how do you protect against the next layer? How do you make sure that the next system, let's say it's an endpoint, really is not trusting of the environment? It means that, back in the day, we used to keep our firewalls actually off on our endpoints, our Windows, devices. Now, I would challenge anyone, why wouldn't you have your firewalls up all the time? And it should be the case, because we're taking our laptop. I'm at another conference event here in, north of Dallas, and, you walk into a hotel. It's an attacker fest there. You don't know what's going on. So you better have your firewalls up. I call it shields up, right? And you need to think of it in that way. And when you think about defense in depth in that manner, and you look at the attack surface that's growing, you start to appreciate why every CIO and every CISO says it's going to take a lot of blocking and tackling. That's what they say, because it's just an endless array of things. But it does give us a direction to say, hey, you can't just put a firewall, and you can't just put AV or EDR onto an endpoint and think you're done.
Well, kind of on that note, Zane, you told me that for as long as you can remember, 80% of the channel has focused on solutions to protect the endpoint, for good reason. But tell me how that's changing.
Yeah, I think it is amazing. Just as you stated, the focus has been to protect the endpoint, and that's where, and rightfully so. That's where the tools have been. That's where the resources have been for MSPs. But I am really excited and happy to see MSPs start zooming out and thinking more broadly, more holistically, as Joe was laying out, about the broader environment, the broader ecosystem. Because, the endpoint ultimately, I believe, should be thought of as one of the last layers of defense. The question is, what can we do to prevent threat actors from reaching the endpoint to begin with? And, for the longest time, we talk about the network. The network has been pretty simple. We think about network from the connectivity lens more than we do from the security lens. And again, a lot of times that just boils down to the tools and resources as a community we've had access to. And so by really taking a look and reassessing how we think about the network, how we think about how we segment our users, zero trust at the network layer, I think we're definitely seeing the community start to think about these things, and we can add those layers of security back into the environment that should ultimately mitigate a lot of these attacks and a lot of these threat vectors that we see today.
Mm-hmm. So the two of you are speaking the MSP language. We are talking tech right now. So there is another aspect of this, though, that, Charles, I wanted to ask you about, and it's the sales portion. So you talked about how MSPs need to look at their stack so they can sell a broader solution rather than just these individual services. Two questions. Why is this so important for partners? And two, how can vendors help? What should partners be asking their vendors for in order to enable them to do that?
Yeah, so I think this is like really important for MSPs, and we sell, when we sell our service, we try and always encourage MSPs to think about how they can bundle the services they're selling together in a complementary stack, and then take that out as a white labeled service to their customers. And the benefit of doing that for their clients is that if I'm the client, I don't really want to know the intricate ins and outs of every single layer of what I'm being sold. I want the MSP to be the expert and to have that trust relationship with what they're selling me is going to be something that can protect me. I think it works for the MSP on the flip side as well, because if they're selling a bundled solution, they're going to retain more revenue, and they're going to be able to sell more services around that. So I think from a sales perspective, it's the best MSPs that we work with are the ones that get that. And I know that from the channel partners in distribution and across the industry, when we talk to them, that's the message that's going on. And from a vendor perspective, what we can do to help MSPs to do that is to really provide collateral that can point them in that direction. So it's where does uSecure sit in? Where does uSecure slot into a stack like that? And how can you bundle that service in amongst other solutions like network protection, antivirus, firewall, etc. And these are really the basics. I think you said at the start, what can MSPs do in an environment where there's so much noise in terms of products, terminology, etc. I'd say, most customers will be thankful if you can say, well, we'll start with the basics. We'll make sure you're protected, at each level, at each layer, to a good level, and then we'll build out your security resilience from there. And I think, like I said, from my experience, the best MSPs that we work with take that approach, and they also tend to be the MSPs that are scaling fastest.
So they're selling their own value proposition, not each individual vendor, each individual solution.
Yeah.
So all three of you touched on this, in that MSPs today, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach anymore. You've got so many diverse client types, different environments, but in order to sell that stack, in order to make that stack scalable, you got to struggle with that. How do you ensure consistent security standards across all of these diverse environments, and still being able to accommodate those different levels of technical sophistication, budget constraints? Again, it's hard to create a solution that's scalable and also meets everyone's needs. So I want to talk about how each of you would counsel partners to approach this. Charles, you brought up, when we were talking, the 80-20 rule for partners to follow here. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that it's really important for partners to Sorry, I've just lost myself on that one. So I spend like 80. They can spend 80% of their time on 20% of the products that they have that they're putting out there, and I think it's super important for MSPs to focus in on the skill set that they have and the products that they have skills behind, and if they can then focus on those areas first before they take them out to market. And then, I think it comes back from the MSP that they're going to have they're going to be providing a better service at that level, and that will come across better with their clients to begin with, and then they can build out their portfolio from there.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. It's tough to do this with traditional tools when trying to manage all these multiple clients and environments. Zane, we talked about this, especially when MSPs are often tasked with supporting all of these different requirements. So Zane, what's the solve for that?
Yeah, I think ultimately having as Charles had mentioned, number one, I'll tell you that we're seeing the same thing where MSPs that lead with selling security as a managed service are absolutely our most successful MSPs, and I think would be regarded broadly as the most successful. I think to your question, how do we solve for that? Is ultimately, I think, having a broad enough and diverse enough tool set that you can meet the needs, the obligations, the requirements of your diverse customers. There are definitely differences, but I think what I would counsel a lot of MSPs is, and I don't think any MSP wants to do the bare minimum. I think what you're seeing is certain verticals, certain industries that have or that demand a higher level of control. But that doesn't mean that it's not important for your other clients that are not demanding it. And so as an MSP, this gives you an opportunity to stand above the rest, to compete differently, to tell a different story, and to deliver a higher level of service ultimately, and a higher level of security posture across your base. So what I would say is, I do think standardization is important where you can standardize. I think that if you have 10 customers and every environment looks different, it's very difficult for an MSP practice to manage an environment like that. And so what I would say is, it's back to the saying, like, rising tides lift all boats. Ultimately, if you service industries and verticals that have or that demand more, expect more, let that be a benefit to the rest of your customers as well. And by selling managed security as a service, you should be, a lot of the sausage making should be abstracted behind your managed service agreement. What you don't want to do is go out to your customers every time and sell yet another point solution, yet another SKU. Your customers are looking at you as the MSP as the trusted advisor, saying, look, I want to know that I'm protected. I want to know that I'm secure. I want to know that my IT environment is meeting the needs of my business. And we can talk about that, maybe at a different point, but how do we frame that to customers? But ultimately, I think that's the position I would take is I would try to standardize where you can and lift the level of service across the entire customer base.
So both of you kind of touched on what I wanted to ask Joe about. So we take everything that Charles and Zane just told us. And Joe, I know you are a process freak. You are all about processes. So tell me a little bit about how MSPs can adopt that really process-driven approach to achieve both of the things that, or all the things that both Charles and Zane were talking to us about. So how do they develop processes aligned to these standards, to these frameworks, to compliance, which we're going to get into here in a minute, to avoid those vendor-specific requirements?
Yeah, I think, Chris, this is such an important topic because I think I'd like to commiserate with our MSP folks listening in and MSSP folks. When you are managing across multiple customers, I think it goes underappreciated how complex that situation is. I like to say, I'll be honest with you, working in a single enterprise, managing IT, even if it's a large one, there are consistency and rules within the boundary of that business. But when you're now looking across, let's say, 50 businesses, and you're managing IT and security for those 50 businesses, how often are those actually consistent? They're not. As much as you'd like to specialize, there's a subset that are very verticalized, and that does create scale for them. But the majority of MSPs actually have a mixed bag of customers. And what that creates is this just friction around standardization, because we had a phrase at LineGuard called standardize, secure, and scale. It's what we all aspire to do when we operate an MSP or any type of business, right? You want it to be repeatable. The challenge you have is that you might be a Cisco Meraki shop, and then you walk into a customer and you're selling the deal and they have SonicWall. And yet you've got to figure out, okay, am I going to take that customer? Because SonicWall is a solid vendor as well. And so why not, right? So you get stuck with this idea of, well, I have a standard of how I configure a Cisco Meraki. How do I do that in SonicWall land, right? And this is interesting because when your level 3 engineers start to think in this manner, and they start to think across vendors, and when the vendors, we call this a 10X ecosystem, by the way, Michelle, our CEO, and myself, and that means when the vendors also work with the MSPs to try to standardize things in ways that are understandable, to say, hey, these settings over here are equivalent to this setting, we can all start to make sense of this. And I think that's necessary. But in the meantime, what can the MSP do? You need a decoder ring, and you should demand it from the vendors to say, look, I've got to meet these business standards, which my end customer has, which might be something like CMMC or cyber insurance or HIPAA or PCI. And you have to backtrack to that as an MSP to provide a solution stack, right? Not one widget, a complete solution to support the business. And that's the challenge for the MSP. And it's going to take a village to make that happen. I think we're getting there because what CIS, what NIST is doing, many of these things are largely trying to simplify and standardize. And I think that's great. And I think it's important, even for our international folks who are working through other standards, we need to look to those standards. And then as vendors, we got to map back so that we can also collaborate with MSPs to do that mapping.
So we're talking about regulatory standards. We're talking about cybersecurity insurance, which is really where we got excited with our conversation when we were on our prep call a couple of weeks ago. Just kind of trying to dive into how cybersecurity insurance and compliance requirements, how they intersect, and what challenges MSPs face in balancing that regulatory compliance with those insurance coverage requirements. A ton of MSPs struggle with this. Again, quickly evolving landscape and requirements and offerings. So Zane, cyber insurance impacts MSPs more than other forms of compliance because they're the operators, right? They're the responsible parties for the IT environment. So how do MSPs best safeguard against that liability? What's the first thing an insurance company is going to ask an MSP if there's a breach?
Yeah, I think the first thing we see every time if there's a breach is, the underwriter, if you look at the carrier, they're going to pull out the policy and they're going to say, look, here are the controls that were mandated in the policy. You need to ensure that maybe you can bring your own device or maybe not. We need to ensure the devices are encrypted, they're updated, they're running an endpoint solution. Down the list you go, right? And there's a long list that you can enumerate through. And what the insurance provider is going to look to you as the MSP is to say, look, we need you to prove that we're in compliance. That way they can check the boxes on their side and they can move forward. And I think this is an area where essentially becomes a foot fault for MSPs, where we have a really hard time attesting that we've complied with this policy. Okay, ensure that everything is patched. I think I can do that. I should be able to get to that. The endpoint is running on every machine. I should be able to prove that. I think I pushed it out, but did they bring a new device? Did the customer go buy a machine? Did we forget to deploy the solution? And so this is where we're seeing a move and a demand towards device posture check. And there's a couple ways to do that. But ultimately, where you can say, look, here are the controls that are being mandated or expected of me as the operator. To your point, Chris, the MSP is the operator. Here's what's expected to comply with this policy. And we explicitly call these controls out. And you're with device posture check, you're essentially able to say, look, we're not going to allow any device on the network that does not meet these requirements. It's auditable, it's reportable. So then if that inevitable event or that event happens, and as an MSP, you need to prove or attest that you've complied with the policy, it's very easy to do so. It's irrefutable, it's very objective. And yeah, cybersecurity, I think to your point, is the number one mode of compliance that we're seeing MSPs have to deal with right now. But you are seeing, again, whether it's CMMC, NIST, HIPAA, down the line, there are other frameworks as well that MSPs are having to comply with. If you rewind the clock 5 years ago, very different story. At the end of the day, what it boils down to is the function of the MSP largely is shifting to a risk manager and managing the risk and managing compliance. It's a big part of the role. And so I expect to see that accelerate for sure.
So we know compliance and cybersecurity insurance can be a challenge, but if we look at it right and we tackle it right, it can also really be a competitive advantage. Joe, you are really big on CMMC being a great example of this, right? So elaborate for us a little bit on how partners can leverage this to generate more revenue, to differentiate themselves from competitors and win in the market.
Yeah, 2 points, Chris. One, looking back on that cyber insurance topic, I personally look at that to be the inner circle of compliance, which is cyber insurance is universal. It impacts almost every major business out there that you're working with and minor business. Why? Because of the third-party risk environment that we're in. The largest businesses are asking their suppliers to do what? To attest to have certain standards. And they're also saying, I need you to survive and be up and running and withstand an event because you impact my business. So they're demanding $2 million policies, $3 million, $1 million, $5 million. And so what's happening is as the end customer environment is saying, I have to have cyber insurance, that is an opportunity for the MSP to actually think about governance, risk, and compliance. I love that statement, Zane, about risk management being central to an MSP's role, to really take on that role as trusted advisor. What keeps up the end customer at night? It's risk. That's what keeps them up, right? There's financial risk, there's cybersecurity risk, there's all kinds of risks. And so you want to let them sleep at night, and you want to be the advisor that does this. With CMMC, it's interesting because the defense industrial base has this ripple effect across so many industries. I am getting hammered by questions by our MSPs about, okay, we're running real fast. We need to figure out CMMC. We also think there's a revenue opportunity with CMMC. And by the way, I need you to be FedRAMP. And, it's going wild, like in the last 3-4 months. And by the way, the CMMC rules haven't been finalized yet, and they're about to be. So revenue opportunity big time in being risk managers and managing risk and really working with the CFO, the CEO, the head of finance, and the folks on the other side, which is great when you're working with either small businesses or even mid-market and enterprise. Great opportunity.
So we're talking about some things that MSPs even sometimes have trouble wrapping their heads around, right? So, and MSPs can talk tech all day long, right? It's not just being proficient in these things, it's being able to showcase the value of it to clients and prospects. So again, they can talk tech all day long, but might have difficulty explaining the value proposition of it to clients, and also not trying to sell on fear, right? So the question we need to tackle is, how can MSPs effectively communicate the importance of all of these different cybersecurity measures, of compliance, of cybersecurity insurance requirements to their clients, and what strategies can they employ to gain that client buy-in and support, right? So Charles, again, on your theme through this whole conversation, you've talked about how vendors really need to help partners out here. So how so? What should partners be insisting that their vendors provide them?
So the way in which we approach this is we look at providing the evidence for why these tools are needed, not around kind of the industry facts and figures, because I think that's been I think if you're the end client and the MSP comes in and they start sort of banging the drum about how 3 out of 5 businesses will be breached in the next 12 months, or like phishing attacks are going to rise 173% in the last 12 months. Those you kind of get that glazed eye look of like, here we go again, we're hearing the same thing. I think what the MSP needs to do is take the narrative away from just kind of the industry facts and figures and say, let's take a look at your business. Let's do a piece of work very quickly where we can take data out of your organization, and we can then use that data to tell the story back to you about where the risk in your organization lies. And from because when you get to that point and you're providing that report back to them, this is now not a scaremongering approach like you mentioned. This is a document or a piece of work that says, this is where you might come unstuck. And it's super difficult for MSPs because, I'm sure every MSPs will attest to, the client that says, well, we've never had solutions like this in place previously, or we've never spent that amount of budget on these solutions previously, and we haven't had any incidents. So you're kind of selling against, take these services and guess what? More likely nothing will happen. But when you bring it back into the data from their own environment, it becomes more relevant and more hard hitting. So from a vendor perspective, what we do, and certainly what we think other vendors should do, is provide the tooling that is simple for the MSP to use, that they can pick up and take to their clients, and they can run those sorts of assessments. And so the way we do it is we run a very quick multi-point assessment with the client, which includes a quick phishing simulation, it includes a quick scan of their environment, and it can come back and say, like, look, if an attacker wanted to attack you today, this is what, because let's face it, attackers are looking for targets. This is what information is about your organization is available straight away. They can then take that information and use that to create a phishing attack, and then they can launch that phishing attack instantly, and then based on the data that we have from the phishing simulation we did, this is what percentage of your organization will get compromised. Now, we can, having that information back will then bring the reality of the situation to the client and just makes that sales process, so much easier. And then, the flip side of that for the client is that, it's easier for them to justify taking these services on board. So I think that's the vendor responsibility comes in, is not just looking at this to say like, look, you should take our product because the industry says so. It's like, you should take our product because, the assessment that we've done on your business says you should take it.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a fantastic conversation. We have about 30 seconds left. So I just wanted to go around the room really quickly and say, biggest opportunity next 12 to 18 months. I know somebody's got to say AI. We have not said AI this entire panel. So I'm waiting for one of you guys to bring it up. Joe, let's start with you.
I am not going to say AI. Oops, I just said it, but I'm not going to say it. I think it's bringing value and educating your end customer on the risk environment that exists. And I think that education goes a huge way in them understanding why they need to work with the MSP and engage on these security discussions.
You're really big about that education piece and MSPs becoming the trusted advisor. So if you have more questions about that, reach out to Joe because he's got a lot of really great thought leadership around this. Okay, Zane, on to you. Next 12 to 18 months, biggest opportunity.
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity for MSPs over the next 12 to 18 months is in the compliance lane. If you want to differentiate yourself in the market, is helping businesses understand how if you're going to win a new opportunity, or if you want to retain and build trust and build a deeper relationship with your existing customers, talk about how you are helping them achieve their compliance obligations. And if we need to fit AI in there at some point, there are certain industries and verticals that are going to be thinking about what does governance look like for AI. We want the productivity benefits of AI, but how do we ensure that we're not leaking sensitive customer data? And so there's a compliance angle there too, but I do believe that is the biggest opportunity for MSPs to differentiate themselves.
Okay, great. Charles?
Yeah, and I think, this, from just to mirror what I've said previously, is I think there's a huge opportunity for MSPs to step away from being that kind of reseller model where you're selling product, and to really consolidate all of the services and products they bring together in like a bundled offering, and that will really set you aside from other partners in the marketplace who maybe aren't doing that. And of course, if you can wrap AI into that, then I'm sure there's enough noise in the marketplace to push that forward.
Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me here today. This has been a fantastic conversation. This could have gone for another half hour, but we've got our bell dinging saying we got to get off and let the next guy go up. So have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
See y'all.
Thank you.